Hi, Tad Johnson here from Island. I'm joined by Brian Borthwell, who's one of our SEs based in Texas. And Brian, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Ted.
You were just sharing an interesting story about a customer you're working with. Can you tell me a little more?
Yeah, so I have a customer who had an interesting challenge. So they do content moderation. So think when you go to any of the forums and they monitor the content to make sure that everything is following and user agreement, stuff like that, make sure there's nothing profane or anything else on the forums. And so what happens is they have other customers that basically what happens is a task list gets downloaded, or they were having to download a task list and work from that for the day's objectives. Well, the way that they were doing that is because the customer said, hey, I don't want you to keep this data. I want you to delete it after every day. So what the customer had to do was basically create a non-persistent VDI. So that way when their users logged off for the day, that data got destroyed. And so that way they could adhere to whatever the customer was actually asking them to do. The problem with that is that the actual customers, the employees, it was a horrible work experience, right? So because every day, because it was non-persistent, they had to log on to the VDI, they had to set themselves back up, whether it be bookmarks or anything else, set it back up before they could start. So when we started talking to them, we showed them, all the different controls that Island had, as well as our secure storage module. So the fact that, hey, I can guarantee that the data is not touching the end user's machine, in which case this customer loved it. They actually made a request for us that, hey, we need to also have this data delete after basically 8-9 hours. Can you do that for us? So we actually put it to R&D. R&D said, yep, we can develop that. And so they actually did about a week and a half later, R&D released a feature that said, hey, we can now control, when this data deletes. So now the customer is able to attest to their customer that says, hey, I'm deleting this data after 9 hours. Their actual users are happy because they don't have to reset up their browser. And it's actually a much better performance because now the user can work directly with the customer's app as opposed to having to VPN in back into the data center, hit the VDI, and go everything else. They're actually performing a lot smoother and a lot better.
That's really cool. And I imagine that that's also a cost and infrastructure saving compared to VDI as well.
Correct. So in this case, they were. It was literally this. This is the only use case for this VDI. They were actually wanting to retire it and move over everything, but this is what was keeping because it was one of their big customers. So now they're able to decommission all that infrastructure, as well as give these moderators a much better work experience.
That's really cool. So we've helped the end users with a better experience. We've helped the infrastructure team to retire some legacy tech that they weren't really having another use for. And we're giving all the security that customer desires.
Correct. Yeah. And even for their customer themselves, they're able to show, hey, as I'm doing all this content moderation, I'm also showing you, here's all the different controls. So they're actually able to tell their customers, ensure their customers, hey, I'm actually being good stewards of your data. Not only am I deleting it, but I'm also monitoring what folks are doing to make sure that nothing goes wrong and that everything is flowing like it's supposed to flow.
That's awesome. And can you tell me, just in case someone's listening to this who's not familiar yet, that you mentioned secure storage. Can you just give a little explanation of what that looks like?
Yeah. So secure storage is, say you're using Island on a device that you maybe don't trust, or you have regulations that say, hey, I don't want data to reside on the end user's machine. So what we can actually do is, instead of allowing that download to go to the end user's machine, we actually download it and save it to a secure storage container that's tied to that browser that sits in their tenant in the cloud. So that way data itself never resides on the machine. And it allows folks to protect the data and contain the data without releasing the data to an end user's machine that you may or may not trust.
Very cool. Hey, Brian, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, thank you.